I stood alone in the courtroom. He laughed. "You are just a penniless housewife," he sneered. I opened my bag and pulled out the red notebook. His lawyer screamed, "Stop her!" The judge froze in shock. "Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin sharing my story, please pour yourself a warm cup of tea and find a comfortable spot to settle in. I would love to know what time of day you are watching this video. If it is the morning, please comment M. If it is the afternoon, please comment A. And if it is the evening, please comment E. Now, let me take you inside this story. They called me a walking ghost. In the hallways of the New York Supreme Court, the clerks whispered that I was a lamb, walking willingly into a trap, begging for the final blow to fall. In the cutthroat, merciless world of high-stakes divorce litigation, you never represent yourself against a ruthless predator like Sterling Cross. It was unheard of. It was professional suicide. What made it even more insane was that he had hired Preston Hayes, the most lethal attorney in the city. People called him the executioner of careers because he did not just want to win. He wanted to strip his opponents down to nothing and leave their reputations to rot in the sun. Everyone in courtroom 42 expected complete ruin that morning. The gallery was packed with reporters, curious law interns, and Wall Street sharks, all waiting to witness the final humiliation of Meredith Vance. They expected to see me break down in tears, sign the settlement papers with a trembling hand, apologize for wasting their time, and disappear back into the poverty I came from. Sterling, of course, thought the exact same thing. He sat there radiating pure arrogance, looking every bit the billionaire CEO of Sterling Dynamics. When I stood up, he actually laughed. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a deep, resonant laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls. The laugh of a man who had never lost a single day in his life. He leaned back in his Italian leather chair, smoothing the lapels of a charcoal suit that cost more than my father made in 5 years. He turned to Preston Hayes, whispering loud enough for the front row to hear. "Look at her, Preston. She is still wearing the same dress from a charity gala I bought her 5 years ago. The hem is frayed, pathetic. She thinks she is in a movie." Preston Hayes did not laugh. With his silver hair and eyes as cold as chipped flint, he merely sneered, tapping his gold fountain pen against the heavy oak table in a rhythmic, predatory beat. "Let her play house, Sterling," Preston whispered, his voice dry as dead leaves. "It makes the takedown even easier. Judge Miller despises people who waste his time. She will be in holding for contempt before our lunch break." Across the aisle at the plaintiff's table sat me. I felt incredibly small. The courtroom air conditioning was blasting, freezing the cold sweat on the back of my neck. Compared to the defense table, which was overflowing with paralegals, expensive laptops, stacks of bound evidence, and crystal water pitchers. My desk was desolate. It was completely empty except for a yellow legal pad, a cheap ballpoint pen, and a plastic cup filled with lukewarm water I had gotten from the hallway cooler. I kept my head down, staring at the scratches in the wood. My brown hair was pulled back into a tight, severe bun that made my scalp ache. To anyone watching, I looked like a defeated woman. I looked like a discarded housewife being traded in for a newer, shinier model, specifically Sterling's 24-year-old personal assistant, Tiffany Sparks. I knew she was sitting in the back row, wearing the diamond earrings that used to belong to me. "Order," the bailiff barked, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "All rise." The heavy wooden door behind the bench groaned open, and the Honourable Arthur P. Miller strode into the courtroom. Judge Miller was a New York legend. An old-school judge with a face carved from granite, he had zero tolerance for theatrical dramatics. He adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, looked down at the case file, and frowned, his expression hardening into a scowl. "Case number 4920, Cross versus Vance," Judge Miller rumbled in a gravelly voice. "We are here for the final hearing on asset division and spousal support. Appearances?" Preston Hayes stood up, smoothly buttoning his jacket. "Preston Hayes for the defendant, Mr. Sterling Cross, Your Honour. We are ready to proceed, and hope to conclude this unfortunate matter swiftly." The judge looked over at my table. "And for the plaintiff?" I stood up. My chair screeched loudly against the floor, causing several people to wince in the quiet room. Sterling chuckled again, covering his mouth with a manicured hand to hide his amusement. Meredith Vance, Your Honour, I said. My voice was quiet, a slight tremor catching the edges. I am representing myself. Judge Miller looked at me over his glasses, narrowing his eyes. He let out a long, weary sigh, signalling that he was already dreading this trial.
Ms. Vance, I'm going to ask you this exactly once, and I want you to listen very carefully. Your husband is the CEO of Sterling Dynamics. The marital assets involved are estimated to be in the tens of millions of dollars, and Mr. Hayes here has been practicing law for 30 years and literally wrote the textbook on divorce litigation. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed without counsel? He leaned forward, dropping his voice an octave.
You are bringing a plastic butter knife to a severe conflict, ma'am. The court cannot provide you with legal advice. I cannot afford an attorney, Your Honour, I said, looking down and tracing the tan line where my wedding ring used to be. Sterling cut off my access to our joint account 6 months ago. I have exactly $38 in my checking account. Preston Hayes snapped up like a jack-in-the-box. Objection, Your Honour. Mr. Cross merely protected the assets from frivolous, vindictive spending. We offered Miss Vance a generous $50,000 settlement to help her transition back to her previous lifestyle. She rejected it out of spite. $50,000, the judge repeated, raising a skeptical eyebrow. For an estate of this size? That would not even cover the retainer for a decent lawyer in this city. It is more money than she brought into the marriage, Preston said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. Your Honour, she was a waitress when they met. She has no financial literacy and barely finished college. We are simply protecting the assets from mismanagement. I see, the judge said. He looked at me, his expression softening into pity. It was the look you give a stray animal you know you cannot take care of. Ms. Vance, I strongly advise you to reconsider the settlement. If you proceed, you will be held to the same standards as a licensed attorney. I will not hold your hand. If you fail to object, evidence will be admitted. If you fail to file the proper motions, you lose. Do you understand the gravity of your situation? I raised my head. For a split second, the fear in my eyes seemed to vanish, replaced by something colder, harder, and much older. But it was gone too quickly for Sterling to notice. He was busy looking at his watch. I do, Your Honour, I said, a new steeliness in my voice. I am ready. Sterling leaned into Preston, smirking. Watch this. She will be crying within 10 minutes. I bet 15 minutes before she's on her knees begging for that 50 grand. Ms. Vance, the judge said, checking the clock. Please make your opening statement. Keep it brief. I have a major criminal trial at 2 p.m. I stepped around the table. I did not go to the podium. I stood awkwardly in the centre of the aisle, clutching my yellow legal pad against my chest like a shield. I looked at Sterling. I looked at the man who had once sworn to love me, the man who had turned my life into a cage. And then I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just heard the trap snap shut. To understand why I was standing alone in that courtroom, you have to understand the girl I was 12 years ago. I was not Meredith Vance, the billionaire's discarded wife. I was just Meredith, a 23-year-old accounting student with a bright future that was quickly dimming under the weight of responsibility. I lived in a run-down little house in Queens that smelled of old wood and lavender. It sat on a plot of waterfront land that had been in the Vance family for 4 generations. While glass skyscrapers and luxury condos shot up around us like weeds, our house remained a stubborn relic of the past. My father, Walter Vance, was the guardian of that land. He was a proud man, a retired dock worker with calloused hands and a heart that was slowly failing him. This is our home, Mary, he would always say, coughing heavily into a handkerchief that would leave red spots behind. They offer millions, but they do not understand. History matters more than money. We cannot sell our roots. But roots do not pay for medical bills. Roots do not pay for the specialized treatments Walter needed. I dropped out of my final semester at NYU, giving up my dream of becoming a CPA. I worked double shifts at a diner called the Blue Plate, serving eggs and coffee to construction workers and businessmen, my feet aching so badly every night that I would cry myself to sleep. Those developers were vultures. They knew my father was failing. They sent men in sharp suits to knock on our door at all hours. They offered cash. Then they started making threats. The city will just take it by eminent domain anyway, they sneered. Sell now, or get nothing. I was drowning in bills. Final notices piled up on the kitchen table like snowdrifts. I was terrified. That was when Sterling Cross walked into the diner. Back then, he was not a billionaire yet, just a rising millionaire, the CEO of a logistics startup. He was handsome, with a sharp, predatory edge that I mistook for confidence. He had blue eyes that seemed to look right through my stained apron. He ordered his coffee black and asked why a girl who could calculate numbers in her head faster than the register was wiping down tables. I told him my story. I was exhausted, vulnerable, and desperate for someone to listen. He started coming in every single day. He left $100 bills as tips. He brought specialized supplements for my dad. He brought flowers. He was my Prince Charming. When the bank threatened to foreclose on our house due to outstanding medical loans, Sterling stepped in. Without blinking, he wrote a $40,000 check to clear the debt. Just think of it as an investment in you, he said, kissing my hand across the Formica table. You're special, Meredith. You deserve better than this struggle.
I fell in love, deeply, hopelessly. I thought he was a saviour sent to rescue me. I introduced him to my father. Dad was sceptical at first, untrusting of men who wore suits on the weekends, but even he was won over by Sterling's respectful demeanour and his sudden interest in preserving the Vance family legacy.
Then came the night that shattered my world. August 15th, a rainy Tuesday. Dad had gone to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription. He liked walking, saying the rain helped him breathe easier. He never came back. The police knocked on the door at midnight. It was a severe accident. A speeding black SUV had jumped the curb 2 blocks from our house, and the driver did not even tap the brakes before fleeing. My father passed away instantly at the scene. I collapsed. I fell to the floor, screaming until my throat was raw. I was 24, an orphan, and completely alone.
Or so I thought.
Sterling arrived before the emergency vehicles even left. He held me tight while I shook. He took care of identifying the remains so I would not have to face it. He arranged the funeral. He handled the police reports. He was my rock, my fortress. I will take care of you, Meredith, he whispered at the cemetery, rain mixing with my tears as his arm held my waist. You never have to worry about anything again. Marry me and let me protect you. 6 months later we were married. I did not care about the prenuptial agreement. I did not care about his money. I just wanted safety. I signed whatever document he put in front of me, trusting him completely. I moved into his Manhattan penthouse. I left the little house in Queens behind, though Sterling insisted on keeping the deed in my name for sentimental reasons. I was so grateful. I did not know then that those sentimental reasons were actually a zoning loophole that required a family member to hold the title for a commercial consolidation. I was blind. I did not see the way he looked at that land, a look he never gave me. I did not see that to him. I was not a wife. I was an acquisition. And like any acquisition, once the deal was closed, the asset was put away on a shelf. The first year of our marriage was a blur of black tie galas, charity dinners, and flashing cameras. To the outside world, I was Cinderella. I had married the prince. I lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. I had a closet full of designer clothes. But inside that penthouse, the air was thin and the walls were made of ice. I tried to be the perfect wife. I learned which fork to use for salad, how to chat about golf with senators, and how to ignore the sharp pinch of Sterling's fingers digging into my arm if I laughed too loudly or expressed an opinion he disapproved of. You do not need to work, darling, Sterling said when I mentioned wanting to go back and finish my accounting degree. He was adjusting his tie in the mirror, not even looking at me. It does not look good for the company if my wife is taking exams like a common student. It implies I cannot provide for you. Enjoy your life. Go shopping. So I stopped. I stopped looking at financial news. I stopped looking at spreadsheets. I became an ornament. But an ornament with no purpose breeds darkness and isolation. Sterling was always working. He built Sterling Dynamics from a mid-sized logistics firm into a global empire. He was ruthless. I heard him late at night in his study, roaring into the phone, screaming at competitors, ruining lives with a few sentences, his voice cold and terrifying. but he was always gentle with me until the baby. 3 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. I was ecstatic. I thought a child would bring warmth back to our cold marble penthouse. I decorated the nursery in soft yellows. I bought tiny clothes. I dreamed of a complete family. But Sterling was annoyed. "It is not a good time, Meredith," he said, staring at his reflection while I showed him the sonogram. "The market is volatile. A baby is a distraction. And frankly, you are not ready to be a mother. You're too emotional." The pressure was suffocating. Sterling started staying out late. He stopped coming home for dinner. When I was 6 months pregnant, I found a receipt for a diamond bracelet in his jacket pocket. A bracelet I never received. I confronted him. He did not deny it. He erupted. He threw a crystal glass against the wall, shattering it, a stray shard slicing my cheek. "You are suffocating me," he screamed, his face twisting into something I had never seen before. "You ungrateful, clingy woman. I gave you a life most women would do anything for, and you are whining over a receipt? Grow up." That night, I woke up in agony. Terrible, cramping pain ripped through my abdomen. I was losing the pregnancy. I called for Sterling, but he was not there. He had gone out to cool off. I dialed 911 myself, sobbing on the bathroom floor.
"I lost the baby, a little boy."
I woke up in the hospital, empty and broken. Sterling was sitting in the chair next to the bed, scrolling through his phone. He did not look sad. He looked relieved. "It is really for the best," he said, not even looking up from his emails. "We do not need complications right now, and an heir makes estate planning messy. The doctor said you were under too much stress. See, you did this to yourself." That day, something snapped inside me, but it was not a loud break. It was the silent sound of a heart turning to stone. I did not scream. I just stared at him, realizing for the first time that I was sleeping next to a monster. After the loss, I fell into a severe depression. I could not sleep. I wandered the penthouse like a ghost. That was when Sterling brought in Dr. Lloyd Finch. "He is the best psychiatrist in the city," Sterling told me. "He is going to help fix your head." Dr. Finch was a small, slick man with cold hands and eyes that did not blink quite enough. He did not ask about my grief. He asked if I heard voices. He asked if I felt paranoid. He put me on medication, heavy blue pills that made my tongue feel like lead and my memories blurry. "She is suffering from postpartum distress with delusional tendencies," Dr. Finch told Sterling in the hallway. I heard them through the crack in the door. "She needs to be heavily medicated, Mr. Cross, for her own safety and yours." Sterling began treating me like a patient. "Did you take your pills, Meredith?" he would ask every morning. "You look a bit manic today." The gaslighting began. Things would be moved around the house. My keys would disappear from the hook and show up in the refrigerator. Important papers regarding the Queen's house would vanish. "You misplaced them again, Meredith," Sterling would sigh, looking at me with fake pity. "Your memory is shot. You are getting worse. Maybe Dr. Finch needs to increase the dosage." I started believing him. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was broken. For 2 whole years I lived in a fog, a medicated zombie in a gilded cage. If it had not been for a simple technical glitch, I might have stayed that way forever, drugged and compliant. It was a Tuesday, grey and rainy, a striking echo of the day my father passed away. Sterling was in London on a business trip, closing a merger he said would define his career. I was home alone, supposed to be resting. The maid, who was usually always buzzing around, had called in sick with the flu, leaving the massive penthouse dead quiet. I decided to clean Sterling's study myself. I needed to move, to do something to clear the cobwebs from my brain. Dusting the high bookshelves, I found an old iPad tucked behind a row of leather-bound encyclopedias. It was dusty, clearly forgotten.
I pressed the home button. It had 10% battery left. The screen lit up.
Then it dinged. Sterling, in his supreme arrogance, had linked his iMessage account to all his devices years ago and never unlinked this iPad. Because it was connected to the penthouse Wi-Fi, it was receiving every single text message he sent and received in London in real time. I sat on the Persian rug, the feather duster slipping from my hand. I watched the messages scroll across the screen. The contact was Tiffany Sparks, my husband's assistant. Tiffany texted, "Has the cow signed the papers yet?" Sterling replied, "Not yet. I need Finch to increase her dosage. She needs to be completely out of it before the annual board meeting. Tiffany texted back, I want the house in the Hamptons. You promised me. And I want that sapphire necklace back. I hate that she wore it in the family photos. Sterling answered, patience, baby. Once I declare her mentally incompetent, I will get power of attorney over everything, including the Queen's property. Then we place her in that facility upstate, the one with the high walls. She will not be a problem anymore. She will just be a sad story. Tiffany replied, send me a photo, I miss you. Sterling sent a photo. It was a picture of him and Tiffany in a London hotel bed, drinking champagne. But it was not their actions that made me sick. It was what Tiffany was wearing. Around her neck was my mother's pearl necklace. The one Sterling said had been lost during the move 3 years ago. The one I had cried over for weeks. He had stolen it and given it to his mistress. I felt a hot wave climb up my neck. It started in my chest, a burning, molten sensation that scorched through the fog of the medication. Adrenaline hit my system like a lightning bolt. I looked at my reflection in the black screen of the iPad. I looked tired. My hair was a mess. I looked like a victim. I looked like the cow they were laughing at.
No, I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded strange, guttural. I stood up. My knees were shaking, but not from fear. From rage. Pure, unadulterated, blinding rage.
I went to the bathroom and flushed every single blue pill down the toilet. I watched them swirl away, taking my compliance with them. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror, really seeing myself for the first time in years. You are Meredith Vance, I told the mirror. You were top of your class in accounting. You survived your father's passing. You survived losing your son. You are not a cow. You are not crazy. I had a choice. I could confront him when he got home. I could scream, cry, smash the iPad over his head. But if I did that, he would win. He had the doctors, the lawyers, the money. All he had to do was call the police and say I was having a mental episode. I would be in a medical hold before dinner, and he would have everything he wanted.
No, I needed a plan. I needed to be smarter. I needed to become the one thing he feared most. A woman who knew her worth and his secrets.
I walked back to the study. I did not smash the iPad. I carefully plugged it into a charger, hid it back behind the books, and turned off the sound notifications. Then I went to the library ladder and climbed to the top shelf. I pulled out my dusty college textbooks. I had not looked at a balance sheet in a decade. But as I turned the pages, the numbers did not look like alien hieroglyphics anymore. They looked like weapons, and I was going to war. For the next 6 months, I put on the performance of a lifetime. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. When Sterling was home, I had to play the doting, confused wife. I pretended to take the pills, hiding them under my tongue and spitting them down the bathroom sink later. I intentionally misplaced keys so he could smirk and shake his head. I let him gaslight me, agreeing when he said the sky was green or that I had forgotten our dinner plans. You're getting worse, Meredith, he would say, stroking my hair with fake concern. Maybe we should look at inpatient care.
Oh no, please, I would whimper, playing my part. I will get better, I promise.
But at night, when he was asleep or travelling, the actress vanished and the investigator emerged. I bought a cheap burner laptop with cash I slowly skimmed from the grocery money, hiding it under a loose floorboard in the guest closet. I spent hours online, relearning forensic accounting. I studied divorce law until my eyes burned and the text blurred. I learned about shell companies, offshore trusts, and hidden assets. I tracked his flights, his credit card spending, his meetings. I knew I could not do it completely alone. I needed a legal brain, but I could not hire a high-profile lawyer. Sterling tracked every penny in our joint accounts. A large withdrawal would trigger an alert on his phone. So, I reached out to Sarah, my former roommate from NYU. Sarah had not become a corporate shark. She was a paralegal at a non-profit legal aid clinic in Brooklyn. We met in dim coffee shops, me wearing a wig and sunglasses, looking over my shoulder every few seconds. When I told Sarah the story, she was stunned. Meredith, this is dangerous, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide as she gripped her coffee cup. Sterling isn't just a bad husband. He is operating illegally. If he catches you... He won't, I said, my voice hard. But I need you to tell me how to record him legally. I need audio evidence. New York is a one-party consent state, Sarah murmured, leaning in. As long as you're part of the conversation, you can record it. But if you bug a room you are not in, that's a felony. That's wiretapping. What about a car? I asked. The Mercedes. The title is in my name. I pay the insurance. He just drives it. Sarah smiled, a sharp glint in her eye. If it's your property, it's a grey area, riskier. But since you own the vehicle, you can argue you have a right to secure it. I took the risk. I bought digital audio recorders the size of a thumb. I sewed one into the lining of his favourite briefcase. I taped another under the driver's seat of the Mercedes. I became a ghost in my own home. I listened to hours of recordings. Mostly boring business meetings, or him flirting with Tiffany. But then, I hid pay dirt. I caught a conversation between him and his lawyer, Preston Hayes, on the way to the golf course. The recording was dated November 12th. Sterling said, "The audit is coming up. I need to move $4 million out of the pension fund before the SEC sniffs anything out. If they see the hole in the books, I'm ruined." Preston replied, "Relax, move it to the Cayman account. Blue Ocean Holdings. Use Tiffany's name as the signatory. If anyone asks, say it's a consulting fee for a logistical analysis. Nobody audits consultants." Sterling then asked, "What about Meredith? She's asking about the Queen's house again." Preston answered, "Don't worry. Dr. Finch has the paperwork ready. The moment you file for divorce, we file for emergency guardianship. We show her medical history, the pills, the episodes. She gets placed in a facility, and you become the trustee of her estate. We sell the land the next day, completely clean." I listened to that audio with headphones sitting in the dark laundry room behind a pile of towels. My hands shook so violently, I dropped the recorder on the floor.
They were not just going to leave me. They were going to erase me. They were going to lock me away until my passing, just so they could spend the money from my father's land.
I needed more. Recordings were good, but they could be challenged in court if they argued illegal placement. I needed paper. I needed a paper trail, and I knew exactly where Sterling kept it. Sterling was arrogant, but he was also paranoid. He did not trust the cloud with his darkest secrets. He kept a physical ledger. He called it his insurance policy. It was a small, red, leather-bound notebook that he kept in a wall safe behind a painting of a sailboat in his home office. I knew the safe was there. I had seen him open it once when he was drunk on scotch. But I did not know the code. I waited until he and Tiffany went to St. Bart's for a marketing retreat. I had 3 days. 3 days to crack the safe or lose my life. I stood before the safe, the sailboat painting resting on the desk. My fingers hovered over the keypad. I tried his birthday. Error. I tried our wedding anniversary. Error. I tried his social security number. Error. Sweat rolled down my back. I leaned back in his leather chair, frustrated. Think, Meredith. Think like a narcissist. What does Sterling love most in this world? Himself? Money? Power? I remembered a dinner party where he bragged that the day Sterling Dynamics went public on the stock market was the day he was truly born. I entered that date. April 12th, 2015. Click. The mechanical whir of the lock opening sounded like music. The heavy steel door swung forward. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Inside, there was no cash, just a stack of hard drives and that red notebook. I took the notebook to the desk and turned on the brass lamp. My hands shook violently as I opened the cover. This wasn't just a ledger. It was a diary of corruption. It documented bribes to city officials over the past 20 years, illegal environmental dumping permits, and extortion schemes against competitors. But when I flipped to the entries from 12 years ago, the year my father passed away, the world stopped spinning. The entry from August 14th read, "Target Walter Vance. He refuses to sell. Claims the land is sacred to his family. He's becoming a major obstacle. We need a workaround." The entry from August 15th read, "Problem solved. The old man wouldn't get out of the way." PH was driving the vehicle. It was messy but effective. The police report filed it as a hit and run. I took care of the responding officers. No witnesses. Now the girl is ours. I gasped, a raw choking sound tearing from my throat. I read the initials again. P.H. Preston Hayes.
My father's passing wasn't an accident. He wasn't just unlucky. His life was intentionally taken by Sterling's lawyer, run down in the street so Sterling could marry me and seize the land. The romance, the flowers, The way Sterling accidentally walked into the diner, it was all a setup. Every kiss, every touch, every I love you was built on my father's blood. I had been sleeping next to the man who ordered the destruction of my family.
I wanted to throw up. I ran to the bathroom and dry-heaved until my ribs ached. I wanted to destroy the penthouse. I wanted to take matters into my own hands the moment Sterling walked through the door. But then I looked at the photo of my father in my locket. He looked so kind, so gentle. He would not want me ruined by acting destructively. He would want true justice. He would want to see them lose everything legally. I washed my face. I walked back to the safe. I photographed every single page of the notebook. I copied the hard drives. I put everything back exactly as I found it. Sterling returned 2 days later, tanned and smelling of Tiffany's cheap coconut perfume. He kissed my cheek. "Missed you, honey," he lied. "Missed you too," I lied back. For the first time, my smile reached my eyes. Because I wasn't looking at my husband anymore. I was looking at a ruined man, and I was his downfall. That brings us to the end of part 1. Ready for part 2?
Now, back to the courtroom. Back to the moment Sterling laughed at me. Back to the moment Preston Hayes sneered.
I stood in the aisle, clutching my yellow pad. The judge waited. The court reporter's hands hovered over the keys. The air in the room was heavy with the expectation of my failure. "Mrs. Cross?" Judge Miller prompted, checking his watch again. "We're waiting." I took a deep breath. I walked toward the bench, ignoring the podium. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and steady, reaching the very back of the room. "My husband, Mr. Cross, says I did nothing during our marriage. He says I was just a waitress. And that's true. When we met, I was a server at the Blue Plate Diner. I served coffee and pie." Sterling rolled his eyes dramatically. "Here comes the sob story," he muttered to Preston. "Get the tissues ready." "But," I continued, turning to face him, my eyes locking onto his, "the law in this state is about partnership. It's about good faith. Sterling wants you to believe he built Sterling Dynamics alone. He wants you to believe the $50 million in the Vanguard Trust doesn't exist." The entire courtroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Preston Hayes' head snapped up. Sterling froze, his hand stopping halfway to his water glass. Water spilled over the rim, staining the table. "What trust?" Judge Miller asked, leaning forward, his glasses slipping down his nose. "The Vanguard Trust, Your Honor," I said, my voice rising. "Along with his shell company, registered in the Caymans called Blue Ocean Holdings, and 3 commercial properties in Seattle purchased under the name of his private driver, Mr. Cooper." In a matter of 3 seconds, Sterling's face went from smug to purple. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "That's a lie. She's lying. Objection!" "Sit down, Mr. Cross," the judge roared, slamming his gavel. He turned his gaze to me. The pity was gone, replaced by a sharp, predatory interest. "Ms. Vance, these are incredibly serious allegations. Accusing someone of hiding assets without proof is the fastest way to get your case dismissed and be ordered to pay opposing attorney fees. Do you have evidence?" "I do, Your Honor," I said. I walked back to my table and picked up a document. I don't have a law degree, but I know how to read a bank routing record, and I know how to track an IP address. I handed a document to the bailiff. "Mark this as Exhibit A, please." Preston Hayes snatched the copy before the bailiff could even hand it to the judge. His eyes scanned the page. It was a wire transfer record, a $4 million transfer from Sterling Dynamics to a generic account in the Caymans, digitally signed by Sterling Cross. Preston looked at Sterling. "You told me the accounts were clean," he hissed through his teeth. "You said you took care of them." "They were clean," Sterling whispered, panic setting in as sweat beaded on his forehead. "That account is encrypted. There's no way she got this. She doesn't even know how to use a spreadsheet. She's an idiot." "Apparently she isn't," Preston muttered. I sat back down. I looked at Sterling, letting my gaze linger. I wanted him to look at me. To really look at me. Not the waitress. Not the crazy wife. But the accountant who used to balance books perfectly.
"I'll call your first witness, Miss Vance," the judge said, his tone respectful now.
"I call Mr. Bennett Sanders to the stand," I announced.
Bennett Sanders was the chief financial officer of Sterling Dynamics. A nervous man with a twitching eye, wearing a suit that cost more than my father's house. He had been coming to our Christmas parties for a decade. He had eaten my roasted chicken. He had laughed at my jokes. He knew I was smart, but he chose to forget it to protect his bonuses. He walked to the witness stand, avoiding all eye contact with Sterling. He took the oath, his hand shaking on the Bible.
"Mr. Sanders," I began, not looking at my notes. I paced slowly in front of him. "You manage the finances for Sterling Dynamics, correct?" "Yes," Sanders said, his voice tight, sweat breaking out on his upper lip. "Are you familiar with the software called the Shadow Ledger?" The colour drained from Sanders's face instantly. He looked to Preston Hayes for help, but Preston was too busy furiously reading the documents I had just submitted, trying to find a loophole. That's an industry term," Sanders stammered. "It's theoretical." "Is it?" I pulled a sheet from my stack. "Because according to an internal email you sent to Mr. Cross on December 14th, sent from your encrypted server, the Shadow Ledger is a double-entry system specifically designed to maintain 2 sets of books, one for the IRS and one for the owner. Correct?" "I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights," Sanders blurted out. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. A reporter in the back row stood up to get a better view. "Mr. Sanders, you cannot invoke the Fifth in a civil divorce trial regarding corporate procedures unless you are admitting to criminal activity," Judge Miller barked. "Answer the question, or I will hold you in contempt."
"It has that capability," Sanders whispered, looking down at his shoes. I pressed on without mercy. On the night of December 14th, exactly 3 days before Sterling filed for divorce, did you oversee a $6 million transfer marked as a consulting fee to a company called the Orion Group?
"Sterling made me do it," Sanders cried out, looking at his boss in panic. "He said it was for future expansion. He said it was a bridge loan." "And who owns the Orion Group, Bennett?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. I don't know," Sanders lied. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit B. It's the Articles of Incorporation for the Orion Group, registered in Nevada." I placed the document on the overhead projector. The light hummed, and the name on the registration was magnified on the wall for everyone to see. Owner, Tiffany Sparks. The courtroom erupted. Reporters started typing furiously on their phones. Audible gasps echoed through the room. Sterling buried his face in his hands. Tiffany Sparks wasn't just his assistant. She wasn't just his mistress. She was the woman he was using to divert his employees' pension funds. "Order! Order in the court!" Judge Miller slammed his gavel, his face flushed with anger. He glared down at Sterling Cross. "Mr. Hayes, get your client and your witness under control, or I will start issuing sanctions that will make your head spin. This is a court of law, not a circus." Preston Hayes looked at Sterling with pure venom. "You told me the girl wasn't on the paperwork," he hissed. "You told me it was a blind trust." "She wasn't supposed to be," Sterling whispered back in terror. "I didn't expect Meredith to find it. She knits, Preston. She makes scarves. How did she look up Nevada?" I walked back to my table and took a sip of water. My hands were shaking violently. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving a wave of nausea. I looked at Sterling. He wasn't laughing anymore. He looked like a man who walked into his own home, only to find a stranger sitting in his chair holding a shotgun. But I knew this was just the beginning. Exposing the financial deception was the easy part. The hard part was next. Because Preston Hayes was about to stand up, and he wasn't going to talk about money. He was going to talk about my mental health. He was going to try to prove I was crazy, and he had a doctor to back it up. And I had to let him do it. I had to let him think he was winning so I could crush him completely. The shift in the courtroom was instantaneous. The moment I exposed the financial fraud involving the pension funds, the air became electric with the static of scandal. But Preston Hayes wasn't a man to panic over numbers. He was a master of character assassination. He knew that in a divorce proceeding, money is just math, but sanity is subjective. If he could paint me as unreliable and unstable, every piece of evidence I had just presented would be dismissed as the wild fabrications of an unstable mind. Preston stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket with a casual, almost bored demeanour. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at the press gallery, making sure he had their attention. "Your Honour, Preston said, his voice dropping into that dangerous, persuasive baritone that had won 100 cases. We would like to move past the financial matters for a moment, while Mr. Cross concedes to some complex corporate restructurings that can be explained in due time. We must address the elephant in the room. We must address the behavioral issues, specifically the plaintiff's mental state.
I froze in my chair. My hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was the second trap. I knew it was coming, but knowing didn't make the impact any softer.
We call Dr. Lloyd Finch to the stand, Preston announced. The heavy oak doors pushed open, and Dr. Finch walked in. He looked nothing like the sweating, desperate man I had heard on the recordings. Today, he was the embodiment of medical authority. He wore a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, glasses perched on his nose, holding a thick leather folder. He looked like a kindly grandfather, the type you would trust with your deepest secrets. He strode confidently to the witness stand, completely avoiding my eyes. Preston approached him like an old friend, leaning against the rail of the witness box. Mr. Finch, thank you for coming on such short notice. Would you please state your credentials for the court? Of course, Finch said, his voice deep and practiced. I am a board-certified psychiatrist with 30 years of experience. I am the Chief of Psychiatry at St. Jude's Hospital and a consultant for the State Department. Impressive, Preston nodded. And you have been treating Mrs. Cross, Miss Vance, for the past 2 years, correct? Yes, Finch said, finally glancing at me with a look of practiced pity. I saw her twice a week for 24 months. And what was your diagnosis, doctor? Finch opened his folder. He adjusted his glasses. Severe paranoid delusions, accompanied by early-onset schizophrenia and bipolar 1 disorder. It is a truly tragic case. The courtroom went quiet. I could feel every eye boring into me. The reporters were scribbling furiously. Crazy. She's crazy. That explains it. Could you elaborate on these delusions? Preston asked gently. Mrs. Vance believes people are stealing from her. Finch lied smoothly, looking right at Judge Miller. She fabricates elaborate conspiracy theories to explain simple misunderstandings. She believes her husband is plotting against her. She hears conversations that never happened. She regularly loses track of time. During our sessions, she frequently claimed the television was sending her coded messages. And did you prescribe medication? I did. Heavy antipsychotics, thorazine and lithium. But... Finch paused, shaking his head with a pathetic theatricality. She was non-compliant. She refused to take them. She would hide them, flush them. Which is why she is here today, making these wild claims about Cayman accounts and conspiracies. It's all part of the pathology. It's a cry for help. Preston turned to me, a smirk playing on his lips. So, Your Honour, we are faced with a dilemma. We have a highly distressed, unmedicated woman fabricating stories to harm a successful man. The documents she produced regarding bank transfers, likely forged during a manic episode. I have seen patients like this create entire worlds in their minds. We ask that her evidence be stricken from the record and that she be remanded for an immediate 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. Sterling smiled again. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. He looked at me with a mix of triumph and mockery. He thought he won. He thought the crazy wife card trumped everything. I felt a wave of nausea. It was the exact same feeling I had for 2 years while they gaslit me. The self-doubt, the fear, the voice in the back of my mind whispering, maybe I am crazy. Maybe I imagined it all. But then I touched my bag. I touched the cold, hard plastic of the flash drive. I remembered the red notebook. I remembered the entry about my father. I remembered Sterling's voice, laughing about erasing me. Your witness, Miss Vance? The judge said. He looked at me with deep concern, maybe even pity. Miss Vance, tread carefully. These are serious medical claims. I stood up. I didn't take my pad. I didn't look at the gallery. I walked straight to the witness box, stopping just feet away from Dr. Lloyd Finch. He flinched, just a millimetre, but I saw it. Hello, Lloyd, I said softly. Miss Vance, he nodded stiffly, clutching his folder tighter. You say I suffer from paranoid delusions, that I imagine conspiracies. Is that your professional medical opinion? Yes, he said, his voice steady. And you swore an oath to do no harm, to tell the truth? I did. "Dr. Finch," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the quiet room. "How are your gambling debts doing? Specifically, the $42,000 you owe to the financial syndicate in Atlantic City?" "Objection," Preston roared, jumping to his feet. "Relevance. This is character assassination." "Goes to credibility, Your Honour," I shouted back, turning to face the bench, my skirt whipping around. "I'm establishing a motive for perjury. I'm showing this man was bought and paid for." Judge Miller looked at me, looked at Preston, and looked at the sweating doctor. "Objection overruled. Answer the question, Doctor." Finch was sweating now, tiny beads of moisture gathering on his forehead. I don't know what you're talking about. This is ridiculous." Finch was shaking now, tiny beads of sweat pooling on his forehead. I have no idea what you're talking about. This is completely absurd." "You don't know?" I smiled, but the warmth never reached my eyes. "Because I have the financial wire records, Lloyd. Sterling cleared your debt on November 15th. A major transfer went from his private company directly to a holding account in New Jersey on the exact day you signed the affidavit declaring me mentally incompetent. Did you really think I wouldn't match the dates?" "That is a fabrication," Finch shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure. "I have never even set foot in Atlantic City." "Is that so?" I walked back to my table. "Your Honour, Sterling wanted everyone to believe I was losing my touch, that I was imagining things. But I didn't imagine the voices. I documented them." I reached into my bag and pulled out the black flash drive, holding it up for the entire room to see. Sterling Cross froze. I watched the realization hit him in real time. His chest stopped moving, and the colour drained from his face so fast he looked like a wax figure melting under the harsh courtroom lights. His mouth hung slightly open, but no sound came out. "Well, what exactly is that?" Preston Hayes demanded. For the first time all day, his smooth, arrogant composure slipped. The man who prided himself on destroying others suddenly looked completely unsure of his footing. "This is Exhibit C," I said calmly. "New York is a one-party consent state for audio recordings. As long as I am a participant in the room, I am legally permitted to record. For the final 6 months of my marriage, I kept a digital audio recorder in my pocket. I captured everything, every dinner, every argument, and every single meeting my husband held in our private residence, while he assumed I was completely unresponsive." "Objection!" Preston yelled, his face turning a deep, angry purple. "This is a blatant ambush. We have not vetted this audio, nor can we verify the chain of custody. This breaks every protocol." "Mr. Hayes, you failed to disclose this doctor's medical evaluation prior to this morning," Judge Miller interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like ice. "You wanted a trial by ambush? Well, you got one. What goes around comes around. Play the recording, Miss Vance." The bailiff stepped forward, took the drive from my hand, and plugged it into the court's media system. A large projection screen slowly lowered from the ceiling with a low mechanical hum. I looked over at Sterling. He was frantically shaking his head at Preston, signaling for his lawyer to do something. To stop it. To make it disappear. But Preston was completely powerless. The trap had closed, and the teeth were locked in. I glanced back at the gallery and caught sight of Tiffany Sparks. She looked thoroughly confused, clutching her designer handbag tightly. She had no idea these recordings existed. She had no clue that her partner was about to pull down her entire lifestyle along with his own. She thought she was attending a victory lap, not a legal wreckage. This recording, I announced to the silent courtroom, was captured on December 20th in our master bedroom. It is a direct conversation between Mr. Cross and Dr. Finch.
"No," Finch whispered from the witness stand. He looked physically ill, gripping the wooden railing like a passenger on a sinking ship.
The speakers crackled with static, and then Sterling's voice filled the room. It was unmistakably him. Arrogant, dismissive, and cold. The exact voice of the man who had controlled my life for years.
The audio began to play.
Sterling's voice came through clearly. "She is resisting the medication, Lloyd. She's awake far too long during the day. She asked me about the corporate accounts again this morning."
Finch's recorded voice replied, "I cannot safely increase her dosage any further.
If she mixes that amount with alcohol, the physical consequences could be irreversible. If anything happens to her, there will be an investigation. I can't falsify a toxicology report of that scale.
I don't need her gone permanently yet, Sterling answered on the tape. I need her legally incapacitated. I need that diagnosis to hold up. If she demands half of the equity in the divorce, the company is finished. The Orion transfer to Tiffany is already heavily scrutinized. I need full power of attorney. Finch sighed over the speaker. I already signed the affidavit for severe paranoid schizophrenia. It's done. No judge will take her word over mine. But you promised to handle my liabilities in Atlantic City. Those people are threatening my physical safety. I consider it handled, Sterling said dismissively. The wire was processed this morning. Just ensure she's completely non-responsive in that courtroom. If she attempts to speak, make sure she sounds entirely unhinged. I want her placed in that upstate facility before February. Once she's put away, we close the deal on the Queen's property, and nobody will ever look into the details of her father's accident. Finch muttered, You are a cold piece of work, Sterling. The old man shouldn't have had his life ended that way. Sterling just laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. I'm a businessman, Lloyd. Sentimentality is a luxury for the broke. As for Meredith, she's just a loose thread that needs to be cut away. The audio ended with a sharp click. The silence that followed was suffocating. It felt as though the air pressure in the room had plummeted. The court reporter's fingers remained frozen over the keys, and the bailiff stood wide-eyed, staring directly at the speakers. Judge Miller slowly removed his glasses. He took a microfiber cloth and wiped the lenses with an agonizingly slow, deliberate precision. He placed them back on his face and looked down at the defense table. Mr. Hayes, the judge said, his voice quiet but carrying the force of a thunderclap to the back row. Did your client just openly admit to bribing a medical professional to fabricate a severe mental illness? And did he just imply direct involvement in the highly suspicious passing of the plaintiff's father? Preston Hayes stood up, immediately pushing his chair 3 feet away from Sterling, physically distancing himself from the fallout. Your Honor, Preston said, his voice visibly shaking. I had no prior knowledge of this recording. I cannot verify its authenticity. This could easily be a deepfake. Artificial intelligence is incredibly sophisticated now. That isn't AI, Preston. I spoke up from my table, my voice echoing clearly. I was right there. I was hiding in the walk-in closet while they plotted to destroy my life. I heard every single word. I turned my attention to Dr. Finch on the stand. Was that you on the tape, Doctor? Did you accept the funds? Tell the truth, Lloyd, because it will take the federal authorities exactly 5 minutes to trace that wire transfer. Finch suddenly broke down, burying his face in his hands and sobbing uncontrollably. He forced me into it. I owed money to dangerous individuals. He told me he'd ruin my career if I didn't cooperate. I never wanted to cause her harm. Bailiff, Judge Miller roared, slamming his gavel down so hard it splintered the wood. Take Dr. Finch into custody immediately for perjury and conspiracy. Contact the district attorney's office right now. Nobody leaves this courtroom. The room dissolved into absolute pandemonium. 2 bailiffs grabbed the weeping doctor and removed him from the stand, his files spilling across the floor like confetti. Reporters shouted over one another. Flashbulbs strobed against the walls, completely ignoring the judge's demands for order. But I didn't look at any of them. I kept my eyes on Sterling. He was slumped forward in his chair, all his arrogance entirely gone. The billionaire facade had shattered, leaving only a small, terrified man. He looked at me, his eyes wide with desperation, and silently mouthed the word, Please, please. After what he did to my father? After the immense pressure that caused the loss of my child? After trying to lock me away in a facility for the rest of my days? After stealing my mother's pearls to give to his mistress? I walked into the center of the courtroom, standing in the middle of the chaos, feeling a profound, icy calm settle over me. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the noise. There is one final matter. Judge Miller looked at me, looking completely drained, but with a deep sense of respect in his eyes. Go ahead, Ms. Vance. What else is there? Sterling is not just a financial fraud, I said, turning to face my husband.
He is an immediate flight risk.
Objection! Sterling screamed, lunging out of his seat and knocking his chair over backward. I am a citizen. I have rights. I am a pillar of this community.
Sit down, the judge bellowed. Say another word, and I will have you physically restrained.
He booked a one-way ticket to Brazil this morning, I said evenly, holding up a fresh document. Departing from Teterboro Airport at 6 p.m. tonight on a private aircraft. Tail number N4920. He completely emptied his personal safe earlier today. I held up the printed flight manifest, along with our building's security log. This is Exhibit D. I accessed his travel management portal an hour ago. He knew his financial double-dealing would be exposed today. He never intended to stay for a ruling. He was planning to flee the country and leave everyone else, including you, Mr. Hayes, to take the legal responsibility. Preston Hayes stared at the document, then turned toward his client with absolute loathing. You utter fool, Preston muttered, loud enough for the table microphones to pick it up. You booked an international flight during a trial? You signed the manifest? I had to, Sterling cried out, his composure completely broken. She found the notebook. She knows everything. I couldn't stay here. What notebook? Judge Miller demanded sharply. I opened my mouth to explain, to reveal the entire diary of corruption and the truth about my father. But before I could speak, a massive sound echoed from the back of the courtroom. The heavy double doors were thrown open with a violent thud. It wasn't the court bailiffs. A tactical federal team strode inside. 6 men and women in dark windbreakers with large yellow letters stretching across their backs. The FBI? Right behind them were enforcement officers from the SEC. The lead agent, a stern-faced woman with her hair pulled into a severe bun, marched down the centre aisle with the absolute authority of someone who had been building this case for a very long time. Sterling Cross, she announced, her voice carrying easily through the open room. I'm Special Agent Monique Ramirez. We hold a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. Sterling attempted to move away, a desperate, clumsy effort to climb over the defence railing. He knocked over a large pitcher of water, slipping on the wet floor and crashing down into a chaotic mess of expensive tailoring and total public disgrace. The federal agent secured him within seconds, pulling his arms behind his back. The crisp mechanical click of the handcuffs echoing through the room was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Preston, do something, Sterling shrieked as they began to march him out. I'd pay you $1 million retainer. Fix this. Call the governor's office. Preston Hayes stood completely still, calmly adjusting his tie as he watched his former client get escorted away. I am officially withdrawing as your legal counsel, Mr. Cross, Hayes said coldly. I do not represent fugitives, and I certainly do not represent idiots. Sterling was marched out of the room, yelling and struggling past the cameras, past the stunned onlookers, and right past Tiffany Sparks. She was currently sobbing over her luxury handbag, realizing that her primary financial source had just completely vanished. I stood alone at the plaintiff's table. The storm had passed, and a profound silence returned to courtroom 42. But this time, it was the silence of total victory. I need to pause the story right here for just a brief second, because simply remembering that exact moment makes the adrenaline rush back into my system. That's a specific sound of the handcuffs locking. It was absolute justice. If you are listening to this right now, and you feel that satisfaction deep down, that relief of seeing a predatory person face the full consequences of their actions, then you're exactly why I am sharing this. Do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and type a number 1 in the comments right now. It lets me know you stand for real accountability and that you are fully invested in this journey. Your support keeps this channel moving forward. Leave that one below, and let's see what happens when a housewife takes over an entire corporate empire. The courtroom gradually cleared out, leaving behind only the lingering tension and the echo of the day's events. Judge Miller remained on the bench, quietly rubbing his temples. He looked down at me, and for the very first time, a genuine tired smile appeared on his face. Ms. Vance, he said, In my 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a self-represented individual completely dismantle a corporate defense team like that. You are in the wrong line of work. I had incredibly strong motivation, Your Honour, I replied, gathering my legal files. Clearly. Now we have a major logistical issue to address, Judge Miller said, leaning forward. Given the federal indictment and the immediate freezing of Mr. Cross's personal assets, Sterling Dynamics is currently completely leaderless. The moment the market opens tomorrow morning, the stock is going to collapse. Thousands of jobs are on the line, and the pension fund has been completely drained. It is going to be an absolute disaster for the employees. I am fully aware, I said, which is why I am formally requesting an emergency corporate order. Go on. I am not seeking a standard cash settlement, and I do not want the real estate assets or the vehicles, I said firmly. I am requesting the voting shares, all of them. Under the marital fraud exception and the dissipation of corporate assets statutes, I ask this court to award me 100% of the voting power of the marital estate immediately, so I can begin the process of restoring the employee pension funds he compromised. The judge nodded slowly, processing the request. That is highly unorthodox. Usually the court would appoint a bankruptcy receiver, but a receiver will simply liquidate the remaining assets and terminate the entire workforce. You intend to keep the company running? I intend to protect the people who actually built it, I said. They did absolutely nothing wrong. They shouldn't lose their retirement security just because my husband wanted to fund a private lifestyle. I hereby grant you emergency trusteeship over the Cross estate, Judge Miller ruled, bringing his gavel down one final time. You are now the majority shareholder, effective immediately, and the acting chair of the board. Good luck, Ms. Vance. You have an immense task ahead of you. 2 hours later, a black town car pulled up outside the gleaming glass skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The corporate logo for Sterling Dynamics was etched in heavy steel above the revolving entrance doors. It used to make me feel incredibly small and unwelcome. Now it just looked like a building. I stepped onto the sidewalk. I hadn't changed my clothes. I was still wearing that 5-year-old dress with the frayed hemline. But as I walked through the main lobby, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Staff members were huddled in small groups, whispering anxiously to one another. They had already seen the breaking news updates on their phones. They knew the FBI had raided the headquarters earlier that morning, and they assumed the company was finished. They stared at me in complete confusion, wondering why the CEO's ex-wife was walking into the building. I marched straight toward the secure elevator bank. I didn't have an active security card. Sterling had revoked my access 6 months ago. The security guard, a man named Joe, whom I had spoken to many times over the years, stood up immediately. He looked incredibly tense. Mrs. Cross, Joe stammered, looking around nervously. Hello. I can't let you up to the executive floor. Corporate policy says, It's Miss Vance now, Joe, I said with a calm smile, sliding the signed court order across the desk. And I'm not a visitor. I'm the owner. Joe looked down at the official legal document, then looked back up at me. A slow grin spread across his face, and he swiped his master access card across the scanner. Give him hell, Ms. Vance, he said. The elevator climbed to the 42nd floor. I rode up completely alone, the quiet hum of the machinery vibrating through the floorboards. I was no longer just Meredith, the dismissed spouse. I was the individual who was about to clean out the remaining corruption in this institution. I walked directly toward the main executive boardroom. The heavy double mahogany doors were completely shut, but I could hear intense arguing coming from the other side. I pushed them open without knocking. 12 men, the entire sitting board of directors, were gathered around the massive oval conference table. They were shouting over one another, phones pressed to their ears, ties loosened, and suit jackets thrown over the backs of chairs. The air in the room smelled heavily of stale coffee and pure panic. Who authorized you to be in here? Conrad Vance barked. He wasn't related to me. It was just an unfortunate coincidence of names. Conrad was the board chairman, a 70-year-old corporate raider with a permanent scowl, notorious for breaking up companies and selling off their pieces for a quick profit. He had been covering for Sterling's financial maneuvers for years. Security, Remove this woman from the premises immediately. Sit down, Conrad, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a cold authority that cut right through the shouting. Excuse me? Conrad sneered, his face turning bright red. Do you have any idea who you are addressing? This is an executive session. Go home, Meredith. Your husband is facing federal charges, and this company is under investigation. We don't have time for this. See, which means, as of right now, I am the individual in charge, I said, sliding the emergency court order across the polished wooden table. It slid perfectly across the surface, coming to a stop right in front of him. Conrad snatched up the document. As his eyes scanned the text, the colour rapidly drained from his face, and his hands began to visibly shake. Ew. This is completely ridiculous, he stammered, looking around the room. Judge Miller gave you the voting rights. You have absolutely no corporate experience. You're a housewife. We need to finalise the sale of our logistics division before the end of the day to salvage our liquidity. We need to liquidate the assets. We are not selling a single asset, I said, walking over to the head of the table where Sterling's empty leather chair sat. I didn't sit down. I just stood directly behind it, resting my hands on the leather backrest. And there will be no liquidation. You don't have the authority to halt the process, another board member shouted, a heavy-set man named Baxter, who was sweating profusely through his shirt. We are facing an immediate liquidity crisis. I have the exact authority required, I replied, and I am exercising it right now, because if any of you attempt to block this order, I will personally hand over a secondary file to the SEC agents who are currently downstairs recovering the company servers. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. It wasn't the red notebook. That was reserved for the criminal authorities dealing with Preston Hayes. Instead, I produced a blue folder filled with printed records from the encrypted shadow ledger. I am fully aware of the kickbacks, Conrad, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I know you awarded the construction contracts for our Nevada facilities to your immediate family, and I know about the insider trading, Baxter. You liquidated 10,000 shares yesterday morning before the federal raid went public. The room went completely dead silent. They stared at me in sheer terror, realizing in that exact moment that I wasn't the uninformative, disconnected spouse they used to laugh about at company events. I was the person who had been systematically documenting their behavior from the shadows. Every single one of you is dismissed from this board, I said evenly. Effective immediately. Empty your desks and leave the building. You can't just terminate an entire board of directors, Conrad hissed, his voice trembling with anger. The stock value will completely tank. The stock value tanked the moment you chose to operate outside the law, I said. Now leave, before I call the agents downstairs to add 12 more individuals to their custody list. They gathered their belongings and hurried out of the room. It was a pathetic sight. 12 powerful corporate executives grabbing their briefcases and rushing past a woman they had completely dismissed hours prior. Once the room was empty, I finally sat down in Sterling's massive chair. It was far too large for me, but it didn't matter. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline, a view that no longer felt heavy or oppressive. I had the company, I had the resources, and I had the authority. But I wasn't entirely safe yet, because there was still one missing piece to this puzzle. Preston Hayes. He hadn't been detained at the courthouse. He had managed to slip away during the immense confusion following Dr. Finch's breakdown. And he knew about the red notebook. He knew it contained the direct physical evidence linking him to the hit and run that took my father's life. More importantly, he knew exactly where I was. The sun began to set over the city, casting long, dark crimson shadows across the office floor. The massive skyscraper gradually emptied out as the standard workday ended, leaving behind a hollow, echoing quiet. The maintenance staff came and went, keeping a respectful distance from the executive suite. I stayed at the desk. I had an immense amount of work to do, sifting through files to determine exactly how deep Sterling's financial devastation ran. It was even worse than the preliminary records indicated. The company was buried under hidden liabilities, and the employee pension fund was entirely vacant. By 11 p.m., the entire tower was completely silent. I was the only person left on the 42nd floor. The city lights below twinkled like cold, distant diamonds. Suddenly, a familiar chill ran down my spine, that primal, instinctual warning that signals immediate danger. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked over at the security monitor resting on the desk. The main lobby was completely dark, and the elevators were idle. But then, my eyes caught the camera feed from the 41st floor emergency stairwell. A dark silhouette was moving through the shadows. A man. He was moving with a distinct slight limp, climbing the concrete steps. He wasn't wearing his usual high-end tailoring. He had on a dark utility jacket and a baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. But I recognized that specific stride immediately. Preston Hayes had injured his knee years ago during a ski trip, and whenever he was under immense stress or fatigue, he favored his left side heavily. He was coming for me. A sudden wave of panic hit me as I realized he must have either compromised the night security staff or utilized an old master access key that hadn't been deactivated yet. He wasn't coming here to negotiate a settlement, and he wasn't coming to discuss terms. He was coming to finish what he had started 12 years ago with my father. He knew I had that physical red notebook. He knew that while the federal authorities had detained Sterling for financial crimes, only that ledger contained the direct link connecting him to the fatal incident in Queens. Without that notebook, he could maneuver his way out of the charges. With it, his entire career and freedom were permanently over. I snatched the red notebook from the desk and grabbed my phone to dial emergency services. No signal. I stared at the screen, which read, "Emergency calls only." A signal blocker. Preston must have activated the boardroom's digital privacy scramblers on his way up the stairs. He was meticulous, and there was a reason people feared his methods. I was trapped on the 42nd floor with a dangerous man, and absolutely nobody knew I was still in the building. I ran to the heavy mahogany entrance door of the main office and locked the deadbolt. It was a solid piece of wood, but against someone desperate, it wouldn't hold forever. I looked around the room for anything I could use to protect myself. A metal letter opener, a heavy desk stapler, a glass bottle. Then I remembered the military-grade pepper gel I had purchased when the divorce proceedings first became intense. I retrieved the small canister from my bag, my palm sweating against the cold metal casing.
Thud, thud, thud.
Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the marble hallway outside. It was the sound of someone who knew their target had nowhere left to run.
Meredith, Preston's voice carried through the heavy door. It wasn't his smooth, professional courtroom voice anymore. It was low, gravelly, and entirely menacing. I know you're in there. Let's be rational about this. Hand over the ledger, and you walk out of here tonight. You have the company. You have the assets. Why do you care about an old man who passed away over a decade ago?
"He was my father," I shouted back through the locked door, my voice shaking with pure rage. "And you took his life intentionally." "It was simply a business transaction," Preston replied calmly. "He was an obstacle to a multi-million-dollar development, just like you are becoming an obstacle right now. Don't make this difficult, Meredith. I despise unnecessary complications." The heavy brass door handle rattled violently, followed by a massive impact. He was throwing his weight against the wood. The framework began to splinter around the lock. I looked back at the windows, solid floor-to-ceiling glass, 42 stories above the street. There was absolutely no escape route. I had to stand my ground. With a loud, deafening crash, the wooden frame split completely open, and Preston Hayes stepped into the room. He looked entirely unhinged. His silver hair was disheveled, and his eyes were heavily bloodshot. In his hand, he held a small silver pistol equipped with a silencer. It looked almost like a prop, but I knew exactly how lethal it was. He looked like a cornered animal, completely unpredictable. "Hand it over," he snarled, pointing the weapon directly at my chest. His hand was trembling slightly. I held up the red notebook. "You want this? This is what you took a life for? A physical record?" "It is my entire existence," Preston shouted. "Give it to me." "Then come get it," I said. I threw the notebook, not at him, but toward the open terrace window on the far side of the room. The wind caught the pages immediately, causing them to flutter wildly. Preston's sheer desperation took over. His gaze instantly tracked the book. panic washing over his face as he thought it was about to fly out into the night sky and disappear forever. In that single second of distraction, I lunged forward. I didn't try to wrestle the weapon from his hand. I went directly for his vision. I brought the canister up and discharged the pepper gel directly into his face from 2 feet away. The bright orange stream hit him squarely in the eyes and nose. Preston let out a raw, agonizing shriek, dropping the weapon instantly as he clawed at his face. He staggered backward blindly, crashing into the small executive bar area and sending crystal glassware shattering across the floor. I didn't waste a single moment. I scooped up the dropped notebook from the floor, which hadn't gone out the window after all, and bolted out the door. My bare feet skidded across the broken glass near the bar, and I felt a sharp pain in my heel, but the adrenaline kept me moving. I sprinted into the darkened hallway. "You miserable snake!" Preston roared blindly behind me, his voice echoing from the office. "I'm going to end you. You're finished." I reached the elevator bank and slammed my hand against the buttons. Nothing happened. The indicator lights were completely dark. He had cut the main power feed from the hallway breaker panel. The stairs were my only option. I threw open the heavy fire door to the stairwell and began sprinting downward. My foot was actively bleeding now, leaving dark red prints on the concrete steps. The air in the stairwell was freezing, filled only with the sound of my heavy breathing.
I could hear him above me. He was stumbling, cursing, and crashing against the metal railings, but he was recovering his footing. The intense pain seemed to be driving him forward into a frantic, dangerous rage.
"You can't outrun me, Meredith." His voice echoed down the concrete shaft like a nightmare. "I know every corridor of this building. I helped design the security infrastructure. I will locate you." I reached the 30th floor, my lungs burning and my chest aching from the exertion. I needed to reach the main ground floor, but if he had compromised the elevator systems, he had likely locked down the main exit doors as well. I would be cornered in the atrium. I needed a way to signal for assistance. I burst out of the stairwell on the 20th floor, entering the secure server room corridor. The air was ice cold, filled with the steady hum of data towers, their blue indicator lights blinking in the dark. I ran to the emergency fire alarm box on the wall and pulled the lever down. Nothing. No sirens, no lights. He had completely disabled the building's emergency alert systems. He had planned the entire scenario. It was meant to look like an unfortunate incident, a distraught individual succumbing to the immense pressure of a public trial. I kept moving down the stairs, 15th floor, 10th floor. My legs felt completely unstable, but I couldn't stop. The threat was right behind me. I finally reached the ground level. I burst through the final stairwell door and stumbled into the massive, empty lobby atrium. The space was dark, illuminated only by the distant streetlights filtering through the massive glass facade. It felt entirely desolate. I ran to the main entrance and threw my weight against the revolving doors. Locked down! The magnetic security locks were fully engaged. I grabbed a heavy bronze decorative statue from the reception desk and slammed it against the glass with everything I had. It bounced off without leaving a single scratch. Reinforced ballistic glass. Sterling's paranoia about public protests had turned his corporate fortress into my prison. I was completely trapped. The stairwell door behind me slammed open with a loud echo, and Preston Hayes stepped into the lobby, limping heavily. His face was a swollen, bright red mask from the pepper gel, tears streaming down his cheeks. He looked completely unhinged, but the silver pistol was back in his hand. He must have located it before pursuing me down the shaft. He wiped his vision with his sleeve, squinting through the dim light of the atrium. "This is where it ends, Meredith," he rasped, his breathing heavy and strained. He raised the weapon, pointing it directly at me. I backed away until my frame hit the heavy marble reception desk. There was nowhere left to turn. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling as I tried to keep him talking. "Why did you do it? Why my father?" Because Sterling needed that land consolidated," Preston said, taking a slow, deliberate step closer. "And I wanted my 10% share of the development entity. Your father was a stubborn old man who refused to see reason. He kept talking about legacy and roots, blocking a multi-million-dollar transaction. So I took care of the obstacle." "You drove the vehicle that night?" I whispered. Correct. It was remarkably simple. One impact, and the problem was resolved. I slept perfectly fine that night, just like I'm going to sleep tonight once I clear up this remaining issue. He pulled back the slide of the pistol, the mechanical sound echoing sharply through the quiet lobby. "Goodbye, Mrs. Cross." "Wait," I said. "Just one thing." "What?" he snapped, his grip tightening on the weapon. "You want final words? Did you actually check your jacket pocket?" Preston frowned, momentarily caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" "Your left jacket pocket. Check it?" He hesitated, the sheer confusion causing him to pause. Keeping the weapon pointed directly at my chest, he reached his free hand into his left pocket and pulled out a small black rectangular object. It was another one of my digital audio recorders. "I slipped it into your pocket when I used the spray," I said evenly. It was a complete bluff. I hadn't slipped anything into his pocket. I had actually left that specific recorder on the office floor upstairs near the window, and he must have picked it up automatically during his confusion. Or it had fallen into his pocket during our struggle. The detail didn't matter. The distraction worked perfectly. He stared down at the device, his brain attempting to process the information. In that exact second, the entire lobby was illuminated by blinding white light. Multiple red laser sights appeared directly on Preston's chest, dancing across his jacket. "Drop the weapon immediately!" A voice boomed from the darkness of the second-floor mezzanine balcony above. Preston froze entirely. He raised his head, blinded by the sudden activation of high-intensity tactical spotlights. The authorities had arrived. "Drop it now or we will engage." Preston looked up as heavily armed tactical officers began rappelling down from the upper level. They had been inside the tower the entire time, tracking the situation. I sank to the floor behind the reception desk, my legs finally giving out completely. The screen of my phone, which had been resting on the counter, was lit up. An active call had been running the entire time. "Agent Ramirez," I spoke softly into the microphone. "Did you secure that?" "We recorded every single word, Meredith." Special Agent Monique Ramirez's voice came through the speaker, crisp and clear. "We've been tracking Preston since his associates posted his bail an hour ago. We bypassed the building's compromised security lines and heard the entire exchange. You did an exceptional job. Now stay down." Preston realized his situation was entirely hopeless. He looked down at the weapon in his hand. For a brief moment, I wondered if he would make a desperate choice. But ultimately, he was a coward who preyed on the vulnerable, and individuals like him avoid suffering at all costs. He dropped the pistol. It clattered loudly against the polished marble floor and slid away into the shadows. He dropped to his knees, raising his hands in total surrender. "Don't shoot," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I'm cooperating. I will give you everything. I will give you Sterling. I'll give you the compromised judges. Just don't engage." The tactical team moved in rapidly, securing him on the floor and placing him in restraints. Agent Ramirez stepped out from the shadows, holstering her sidearm as she approached the desk. She looked down at my bleeding feet with genuine concern. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. I looked over at Preston Hayes as they dragged him out of the lobby, weeping openly. "I am completely fine now," I said. I handed her the red notebook. "Here, this is exactly what he took a life to protect. This is the evidence." The collapse of the Cross network was swift and absolute. With the physical evidence of the red notebook secured in federal custody, the remaining pieces fell apart rapidly. Facing severe criminal charges, Preston Hayes immediately turned state's evidence against Sterling to protect himself. He exposed every single detail of their operation, every bribe, every hidden account, every illegal transaction, and every cover-up they had orchestrated over the past 20 years. But the cooperation didn't save him. Preston was sentenced to life in maximum security without the possibility of parole. 3 months into his term, he passed away in his cell from what authorities ruled a sudden cardiac event, though rumours circulated that his past actions had caught up with him inside. The man who had dismantled so many careers met his own end in isolation. Sterling Cross, my former husband, accepted a plea agreement to avoid the maximum penalty for conspiracy. He was sentenced to 30 years in a federal penitentiary. The final time I saw him was during his formal sentencing hearing. He looked completely spent. His hair had thinned dramatically, and his posture was entirely broken. He stared at me with pure resentment, but I simply looked right through him. He was no longer a threat. He was a non-entity. Tiffany Sparks lost absolutely everything. The federal government seized every asset associated with the Orion Group. The jewelry, the vehicles, and the estate in the Hamptons were all liquidated. She was indicted for her role in the financial schemes, but managed to avoid incarceration by testifying against Sterling. Her reputation, however, was permanently ruined. The last I heard, she was working an entry-level service job in New Jersey. The symmetry of the situation was remarkable. As for myself, I chose not to retain the immense wealth. I liquidated Sterling's personal luxury assets, the vessels, the aircraft, and the real estate holdings, using the proceeds to completely restore the employee pension funds with interest. I also established an educational trust fund to cover college tuition for the children of the workforce affected by the fraud. Then I executed a corporate maneuver that caught the attention of the national financial press. I transitioned Sterling Dynamics into a complete employee stock ownership plan. The institution no longer belongs to an individual. It belongs entirely to the people who keep it running: the logistics drivers, the warehouse staff, and the administrative assistants. I retain the family property in Queens, the house by the water. I completely renovated the structure, refusing every offer from commercial developers, and transformed it into a dedicated community outreach facility for at-risk youth. I named it the Walter Vance Center. An entire year has passed since the trial concluded. The leaves across New York have turned to brilliant shades of gold and amber. Yesterday morning, I drove out to the cemetery in a practical sedan I purchased with my salary as the active board advisor. I walked through the grass until I reached a simple, beautifully maintained stone marker. It read, Walter Vance, beloved father, guardian of the land. I knelt down in the grass, not caring about the soil on my clothes, and placed a copy of the final corporate restructuring deed alongside a bouquet of fresh lilies on the ground. We secured it, Dad, I whispered, touching the cold stone surface. The land is safe, and they faced full legal accountability. They can never harm anyone again. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, and for a fleeting moment I felt a distinct warmth settle over my shoulder, like a reassuring weight resting there. I stood up and dried my eyes. They were tears of complete relief, not sorrow. I was no longer the dismissed spouse. I was no longer the victim, and I was no longer the medicated individual struggling to get through the day. I'm Meredith Vance. People often say that a wronged individual possesses an unmatched destructive fury, but they are mistaken. Fury is loud, fury is chaotic, and fury eventually burns itself out entirely. What I possessed was far more potent than mere anger. I possessed absolute patience, a meticulous strategy, and a physical record of the truth. Sterling and Preston believed they were entirely beyond the reach of the law because of their resources and influence. They overlooked the most fundamental rule of survival. You never, ever push a daughter who has lost everything into a corner. I walked back to my vehicle as the sun set over the Manhattan skyline, a skyline that no longer cast a shadow over my life. I'm completely free. Thank you all for listening to my journey. Documenting these events wasn't an easy task, but I hope it serves as a powerful reminder that no matter how small you might feel in a situation, you possess immense strength. The truth is the most formidable asset you can carry. If you valued this account of cold, systematic justice, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. It truly assists the channel in reaching a wider audience. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe 30 years was a sufficient sentence for Sterling? Or should he have received the same outcome as Preston? I read through every single response. Until next time, stay completely focused, protect your boundaries, and always secure your evidence.